When I first looked at making bacon, I thought it was going to be really complicated, something that took ages. What I've actually found along the way is that it doesn't need to be complicated, and we're just trying to show you that simplicity and encourage people to give it a go. For this part of the process, all we need is pork, salt, and brown sugar. What I have here is a pork loin roast, and the first step that I'm going to be doing is removing the skin from this side. It's not an essential step, but I think it sort of helps with letting the salt penetrate, and also when it comes to smoking, that smoke to penetrate and just give it a nicer flavour. And taking the skin off is pretty straightforward. It's just the same as if you were taking the silver skin off a back steak or filleting a fish. And you want to leave as much fat on there as you can, because that just makes the bacon nicer. And this skin's not going to get wasted either. You can keep this and just make pork crackling out of it. There's a really good website called Eat Cured Meat, and on there's a lot of information about making all sorts of different cured meats. On there it's got a couple of different ways of doing this. You can make a brine, which is just salt and water, or you can do a dry cure, which is what I'm doing. And a dry cure is really just salt and brown sugar. The process really is as simple as taking your salt and brown sugar in the right quantities, applying it to your pork, and then just putting it in the fridge for sort of 5 to 7 days. That'll cure the meat and pull a lot of the moisture out of it. And then once that's done, it's ready for smoking. And the smoking just gives it that nice smoky bacony flavour. I haven't actually heard of wild pork being used for making bacon. I imagine you can do it, but you just won't have the fat content. When I do finally get myself a nice pig, I'm going to actually try it. But this is the only meat I buy. We prefer to just eat venison and anything else we catch and kill.
Do you know what they do with supermarket bacon? Like, what's the difference?
In New Zealand anyway, we're pretty lucky. You can get good bacon from the supermarket, but the thing is it's just going to cost you more. You're paying for it because it obviously takes a bit of time for the butchers to do it properly. So the cheaper your bacon gets, probably the worse the quality of your meat and the less time they take in the process of actually making it. So you may find that like your cheapest bacons will just be, the meat will be coming from overseas, whether that's China or I think parts of Europe. We get the cheaper pork from. Pigs can eat, they pretty much eat anything, so it's always good to know where the meat's coming from, because you never know what they've been eating.
And where's this meat from?
This is New Zealand, free farmed pork, brought it online, and it gets delivered. You just know that this is going to be a certain quality of meat, which is quite good. I only want to have good quality, or I'm just not going to eat meat. So that forces me to get out there and get the meat that I want to be eating. The reason why I started doing it is I wasn't in a position to be buying the really nice bacon that I wanted to get. So I started looking at how hard is it actually to make it. And I found it was going to be surprisingly easy to make it. And after the first time I made it, I actually found that, yeah, that tastes a lot like the stuff you'll get from the butcher. And you get to control what goes into it and sort of the end flavour as well. So there's a bunch of stuff you can do with it. You can smoke it for as long as you like. You can change the different woods you use in the smoke. And it just gives you that control over the process. Plus, for your money, you're going to get a much better product if you do it yourself. If you're getting that high quality product and paying less for it, then you can eat it more often. And I think that's probably the good thing, is that can become more of a staple food rather than a luxury food. Now that we've got the skin off the pork, next step is to get your salt and brown sugar ready. I'm going to be using 55 grams of salt and 25 grams of brown sugar, and that is for 2 kgs of pork. There's a website which has a really good calculator there for determining how much salt and brown sugar you'll need for the weight of pork that you're using. And we'll put a link to that down in the description. So the first step is going to be mixing the salt and the brown sugar. I just chuck that into a bowl and give it a bit of a stir up. You just want to give that a good stir up as well, so that your brown sugar and salt sort of evenly mix through. I'm using a Himalayan pink salt, but you could use sea salt, just whatever salt you wanted. You can add what's called a pink salt, which is a preservative that they use in commercial meat processing. I personally don't think it's necessary, so I'm just going to not add it in here and just let the salt and sugar do its job. You may have heard a lot about nitrates. I think the pink salt is that nitrate. So that's the additives that potentially, I don't know what the science behind it is, but it's potentially not that great for you to have too much nitrate. I think the difference between a cheaper bacon and a good bacon is the water content of it. And when you do it like this, it's quite a dry bacon, so you don't get all that moisture coming off in the pan when you fry it, which is much nicer. You don't get boiled bacon. You get a really nice crispy bacon.
And that's probably something people have a lot of experience at when they're cooking bacon.
Yeah, some of that can come from overloading the pan with too much. You put too much bacon in, but most of the time I think it is just the water content of cheaper bacon is really high. And that just gets released when you put it into the pan. Now that I've got the salt and sugar mixed up, I'm going to put the pork into this container here. And this is where the curing is going to take place. And then I'm going to be adding half the sugar salt mix to the top, and then I'm going to flip it over and add the other half. So you don't need to be perfect with this, just try and get good coverage, because what you're going to do throughout the curing process of sort of 5 to 7 days is each day you just sort of flip it over, and then you'll get quite a lot of moisture released out of the pork, and that sort of becomes like a salty, briny mixture, and you can just spoon that over the top of it each day, and that sort of spreads it out a bit. So I'm just going to sprinkle it over there just so you get a nice even covering. And I actually probably put a little bit more on the meat side rather than the fat side. Don't know if it makes much difference, but I think it kind of penetrates into that meaty side better than through the fat. So that's probably just over half of that mixture there. And I'll sort of just give it a bit of a rub in there with the fork. This cut of meat it's what's known as a pork loin roast, and I've sort of found that to be the cut that I like making, and it's the equivalent of if you went and brought middle bacon from the supermarket or the butcher. I think the other kinds are you can get shoulder bacon and streaky bacon. Streaky bacon is pork belly, and shoulder bacon is obviously the shoulder from the pork. But I tried shoulder. It's a cheaper cut of meat, but I found it was just a bit too sinewy for the bacon. But you could probably still use it, just trim it up a bit more. There'd just be a bit more preparation. I think I might try some pork belly next, because that's probably a little bit cheaper as well than the loin, and it's just a fattier bacon. Right, so I've done that side. I'm just going to flip it over carefully so I don't lose all my salt. Now I'm just going to put the rest of that salt brown sugar mixture on the other side.
And this can probably be done in numerous different ways, can't it?
Yeah, this is what I'd probably call your most basic level of bacon, but which for me is probably the best way to do it, because I personally think bacon should be simple, and it really doesn't take much to get that bacon flavor. It's really the salt, brown sugar and smoke, and you're going to get a really nice bacon flavor coming through. There's a lot of different things you could add if you wanted to. You could add garlic powder or something like that, or pepper, any sort of herbs and stuff, just to give it a bit more flavor if you want to do some experimentation. And that's the great thing about doing it yourself, is you get to play around with that in different flavors.
Bacon in my mind always seemed like it was a complicated process.
Yeah, well, when I first started looking at this stuff, it kind of seemed like black magic was going on, some sort of black magic to cure this meat, and it must be something that requires like a professional and years of practice and knowledge to do. But the reality is a little bit of time and some basic technique, and it's really attainable for anyone. In our minds, as we become more detached from those basic processes of curing meat and preserving meat, it becomes like a product rather than a process. And the actual thing is it's just a process for preserving meat. It just happens to make a really delicious end product. And with a lot of things like this, it's much simpler than you probably think to make. And you can do it in bulk, which is when you start saving your money. You're not buying 200 grams of bacon. This is a 2 kg block of pork. I've brought 4 kgs, and in the past I'll make sort of 8 kilograms of bacon. That'll last me most of the year. And that's really easy to do in one go as well. I wouldn't have even thought of trying this stuff until I started hunting and getting my own meat and actually cutting up the animals and getting a feeling for what the different cuts are and what you can use those different cuts for, and just building that confidence to sort of buy a bigger chunk of an animal and cut it up myself and do a bit more processing. And that's the great thing about hunting, is I think you get a much closer connection to what you're eating. You get to see it from a living animal and then right through to a processed end food product. And I think for everyone it's a little bit daunting at the start when you start thinking about butchery and things like that, but probably the mindset you need to go into it with is you can't really mess it up when you're butchering or chopping meat up, because at the worst case you can just turn it into mince or something like that. So it's better to try it and practice, and you're going to get better and better as you go along. And just there's plenty of good content out there. I've watched a lot of videos from butchers and people with butchery experience, and that's really your best source of knowledge, beside actually having someone show you how to do it. That's the beauty of things these days, that you can just go on the internet and you can have some of the best butchers in the world showing you how to process an animal. Now that we've got this brown sugar and salt good covering on the pork there, it's really just put a lid on it. Just put a lid on it, seal it up. That goes in the fridge. And then it's just a matter of time. So you just leave it for sort of 5 to 7 days. And each day I'll just take that out and sort of turn it over, and then just spread a bit of the brine that comes out over the top of it. And it's really simple. After it's gone through that process of curing in the fridge, what you'll be doing is you'll be moving on to the next stage, which is smoking. It's been 5 days now, and we have our pork out of the fridge. It's cured nicely, and you can see quite a lot of moisture's come out of it, and the meat will have lost a bit of weight itself, which is part of the curing process. The next step will be to pat it dry with a paper towel to get the excess moisture off, and then we'll transfer it to this wire rack here, and it will go into the fridge overnight. And that'll just make the meat take on the smoke even better, because it'll form a sort of almost a tacky layer on it overnight. The pork's been in the fridge overnight. It's the next morning, and we're ready for the final phase of our bacon making process, which is smoking, and probably arguably the most fun part of the process for me. I've got it in the smoke box here, which is just a timber box that I've made out of untreated timber. The smoke generator I'm using is the Smoke Eye. What I liked about it was that it's a product that's manufactured here in New Zealand, which you don't get a lot of these days. It's also really reasonably priced, and it's a straightforward smoke generator. It's gravity fed, so all you do is load your wood chips into the top of it, light it, and then you just leave it and let gravity do its work, and the wood chips sort of work their way down and burn as the process goes on. It's a really small unit as well, which means I can just unscrew it from my smoke box that I've got at home and take it away camping with me. I attach it to just a traditional stainless steel smoke box, and I smoke trout. I find that gives you a much better flavour than putting the wood chips inside the box itself. Just a much nicer smoke. You'll notice it if you use it, that the smell of the smoke's different. It's just not as harsh, and it smells really nice. The smoking process itself is really simple. You just put your bacon into the smoker, loading your smoke generator with whatever wood chips you've chosen to use. I'm using a mixture of Pahutakawa and cherry, which I think is just a really nice combination. And it's just a matter of lighting it and then letting the smoke do its work. And I'll just leave it there smoking for the whole day and just keep an eye on it and make sure the smoke generator's not gone out, and just make sure the smoke's getting drawn through the smoker. I think the amount of time that you smoke it for is really down to personal preference, and I think there's quite a lot of leeway there. It's not down to an exact hour. I start mine in the morning and then just take it out in the evening. I think one of the key things is just making sure that the internal temperature of your smoker doesn't get too hot, because you don't want your meat sitting in a really warm environment for too long. I'll stick a thermometer in there and just check on that every now and then and make sure it hasn't got too high. Right, as you can see, I've got our bacon. It's finished, it's come out of the smoker, and it's smelling amazing. I took it out last night after smoking it for about 6 to 8 hours. So after smoking, I transferred it to snap lock bags, sealed it up, and put it into the refrigerator overnight. And what that does is it just allows the flavors to develop a bit in the bacon, and you really get that smoky flavor just penetrating into the meat a bit better. And you can actually leave it in there for up to a couple of nights for that flavor to develop even more. The next step for me will be to vacuum seal this bacon and then put it into the freezer. I'll take it out when I'm ready to use it, and I will cut it then. And then I will refreeze it and just use the packets as I need them. The reason why I will freeze it before I cut it is I've found it's much easier to slice the bacon in a nice uniform manner when it's sort of semi-frozen. You just want it as frozen as you can get it, but still be able to cut it. This really only applies if you're using one of those electric meat slicers. I went out and brought one, and it was one of the cheaper sort of consumer grade ones, so it's not a professional version. I think with the professional versions, it'll be much easier to slice the meat even if it's not frozen. But with those cheaper ones, which don't cut quite as well, it just works much better if your meat is sort of frozen or semi-frozen. And I've found that freezing it and refreezing it a couple of times doesn't really have any ill effect to it. I haven't noticed any decrease in the quality of the flavor or anything like that. I think it's important to say that I'm no expert in this sort of stuff, but really all I'm trying to achieve with this video is encourage people to give it a go. Anyone can make bacon, that's the thing, that's what I'm trying to get across there. It's quite a straightforward process, and it's one that's really quite rewarding, so I'd encourage anyone who's been thinking about it just to give it a go. If any of you do give it a go, we'd be keen to hear how it's all gone for you. If you've got any questions, just let us know and I'll do my best to answer them, or point you into the direction of some of the resources that I found along the way that really helped me out and answer some of the questions I had. If there's anyone watching who's got expertise in this sort of stuff as well, if you can see any gaps in what I've sort of presented, just let us know. I'm always open to learning new things, so would appreciate any feedback you've got.